listening to 106.7, Wilmington's Big Talker, and my name is Paul Vallone. I'd like to welcome you to Guns, Politics, and Freedom, where each Saturday at 1 p.m. and Sunday at 5 p.m. we give you the ammunition to better defend your gun rights. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at hyattguns.com. In case you aren't familiar with me, I direct Grassroots North Carolina, or GRNC, since 1994, our state's most effective gun rights organization. As its director, I was involved in drafting and passing our original concealed handgun law. Since then, GRNC has gone on to engineer passage of concealed handgun reciprocity, our purchase permit bypass, Castle Doctrine and Stand Your Ground, the expansion of concealed carry to state and municipal parks, restaurants, public assemblies, educational properties, and much more. Grassroots North Carolina is exactly what the name implies, a grassroots collection of volunteers from all walks of life who share a common concern that our constitutionally guaranteed freedoms are being eroded. Check us out at grnc.org. That's grnc.org. Please allow me to wish you a happy 4th of July on this, our 244th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence by our original Continental Congress, the day when the famed signatories Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and the members of the Second Continental Congress declared us free of British rule. Unfortunately, we have a significant contingent in this country working to ensure that we don't make it to a 250th anniversary. And I doubt you could find more than half a dozen high school students who have been taught the origins of this holiday. All of which brings us to today's topic. Welcome to Part 4 of our Insurrection in America series, in which we will discuss the implications of the current left-wing insurrection for the future of our republic. It has become obvious to anyone willing to pay attention that the American left will go to any length to destroy any American tradition, sacrifice any life to violent crime, and make any city uninhabitable in its quest for power. For years, we have heard that progressives merely want common sense reform of our gun laws, our criminal justice system, and our economy. Well, yet another thing we can thank Donald Trump for is driving the left to reveal what they truly have in mind for America, to shed the camouflage of incrementalism they have pursued for at least 60 years, to tell America what their vision is for our country. That vision is for a socialist autocracy not unlike Soviet Russia or Communist China. For the past several election cycles, I have said that our republic depends on the results of that election, and with each election cycle it has become increasingly true. If the left gains control of both chambers of Congress and the White House, we will witness not only passage of unconstitutional gun bans, the unconstitutional status of the District of Columbia gaining statehood, not only the dramatic expansion of the welfare state, and not even just the complete absence of the rule of law, resulting in skyrocketing crime. No, what we will witness will be the corruption of our political process wherein, like any banana republic, the left will ensure its perpetual stranglehold on power, forever ending our system of government. This and more will be the topic of today's show. But first, this just in gun rights news. In the present cloud of chaos, there is a silver lining. It seems that every time Black Lives Matter or somebody else screams that we should abolish the police, people go out and buy guns. Whether it's urban police budget slashing or the declaration of an anarchist zone someplace, people have correctly ascertained that they can't count on anybody to protect them except themselves. Says CNN Business, and I quote, "Firearms dealers across the country have reported a recent spike in sales, citing the unrest following police brutality protests in support of George Floyd and calls to defund the police as catalysts." In Illinois, the Chicago Tribune reported, and I quote, "With a wave of crises crashing across the country, more than 40,000 Illinoisans applied for a gun permit in a little more than 2 weeks this month, more than 500% over this time last year." And said the Washington Examiner, quote, "The FBI recorded its highest ever number of background checks for gun sales in June, a 70% jump over June 2019, and the latest evidence that more guns will be sold in 2020 than ever in American history. Even so, so-called progressives are now getting woke. Mark and Patricia McCloskey live in St. Louis in a neighborhood with million-dollar homes. The entire neighborhood is privately owned and managed, which means the entire street is considered private property. And McCloskey is a woke, pro-Black Lives Matter progressive. So imagine their surprise when one of the many rioting mobs rudely interrupted their dinner by crashing through their gate. You may have seen the videos of a pink-shirted, rather portly guy with an AR-15 and his wife waving around a handgun as they held off a mob that threatened them with death and even threatening their dog. Said McCloskey, and I quote, "The only thing that stopped the crowd was my rifle." A side note. A few weeks back, we ran an interview with renowned self-defense attorney Andrew Branca regarding use of force against mobs and rioters. He noted that your chances of being prosecuted for using deadly force depend on where you live. Well, apparently that applies here, since St. Louis Circuit Attorney Kimberly Gardner's office is reportedly investigating the couple. Gardner is an admitted supporter of the Black Lives Matter movement. Oh, and as a closing note on this, Fox News reported yesterday that McCloskey and his wife are now getting death threats, including a planned riot back at their house yet again, and they have been utterly unsuccessful in getting any help, even a callback from the St. Louis police. Elsewhere, if you are an NRA member, you are apparently a racist. At least as documented by gun rights writer Dave Workman writing in AmmoLand.com. First we had Michael Bloomberg's AstroTurf group, Everytown for Gun Safety, whose mouthpiece, Shannon Watts, said, and I quote, "The NRA's leaders have yelled about needing guns to protect against tyranny for years. Yet when President Trump threatened to deploy the military to states across the country, the NRA was silent. While police and the National Guard have been brutalizing and tear-gassing protesters, poor protesters, the NRA has not had a word to say about tyranny." Yes, you heard it right. Using the National Guard to stop leftist insurrection is, in Watt's words, tyranny. She also added, "That's because the NRA and Donald Trump don't have disagreements. Their inflammatory racist rhetoric and their extreme guns everywhere agenda are their joint priorities." Then we have the Seattle-based Alliance for Gun Responsibility that said, and I quote, "Attempts to oppress people of color and black people specifically turned the gun lobby from a sporting organization promoting marksmanship and firearm safety to extremists intent on opposing common-sense firearms laws. Today, the gun lobby traffics in white supremacist messaging and consistently stokes fear about people of color in an attempt to drive gun sales. You white supremacist, you. And by the way, I don't think we have to do a single thing to drive gun sales in the current environment. Anyway, in Minneapolis, leftists are doing what leftists do, namely guns for me but not for thee. This would be the same Minneapolis City Council which recently voted unanimously to dismantle its police department. The City Council, whose president, Lisa Bender, recently expounded on her vision for a future free of police. But as in every socialist autocracy, such things apply only to you, of course, the peasant, not to your beneficent leaders. Unsurprisingly, it seems that the people who would be deprived of police protection have been making death threats against the council. Imagine that. So, like good leftists, the council hired private security to the tune of $63,000 in taxpayer funds for the 3 weeks that they have had it. And unsurprisingly, city council members have been unwilling to discuss the matter with the news. For years, you've told relatives, friends, and acquaintances that gun control is a slippery slope, and that each ineffective gun control law passed intentionally leads to the next, in what is an incremental effort to ultimately ban the private ownership of firearms. Doubtless, when you said that, those people called you paranoid. So in our next segment, we will give you the information straight from the horse's mouth to let your friends and family know that, far from being paranoid, you have correctly identified the scheme of the left to end private gun ownership for average Americans. Right now, you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7 WilmingtonBigTalker.com. We'll take a short break, after which we will return with still more information better enabling you to defend your gun rights. My name is Paul Vallone. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at HyattGuns.com. For years, you have likely told relatives, friends, and acquaintances that gun control is a slippery slope, and that each ineffective gun control law passed intentionally leads to the next, in what is an incremental effort to ultimately ban the private ownership of firearms. Doubtless, those people called you paranoid. Well, here it is, folks, the ultimate goal of gun control, laid out clearly by the people behind gun bans. The piece was published on the left-wing website Daily Kos and is entitled, How to Ban Guns, a Step-by-Step Long-Term Process. It was recently pointed out to me, having actually been dated from the Obama years. I will read it verbatim. And I quote, "It's nice that we're finally talking about gun control. It's very sad that it took such a terrible tragedy to talk about it, but I'm glad the conversation is happening. I hear a lot about assault weapon and large magazine bans, and whilst I'm supportive of that, it won't solve the problem, you think? The vast majority of firearms deaths occur with handguns. Only about 5% of people killed by guns are killed by guns which would be bannable in any foreseeable assault weapon ban." Nice to hear him admit it anyway. Furthermore, there seems to be no talk about high-powered rifles. What gun nuts don't want you to know is many target and hunting rifles are chambered in the same round that Adam Lanza's assault weapon was. Even more guns are chambered for more powerful rounds like the 30-06, my personal favorite, 7.62 by 54R. Even a 22, the smallest round manufactured on a large scale, can kill easily. In fact, some say the 22 kills more people than any round out there. Again, I like that we're talking about assault weapons, machine guns, and high-capacity clips. You own any machine guns? Not too many people do. They've been restricted since 1934, but anyway. But it only takes one bullet out of one gun to kill a person. Remember the Beltway sniper back in 2002, the one who killed a dozen odd people? Even though he used a Bushmaster assault rifle, no it wasn't, he only fired one round at a time before moving. He could have used literally any rifle sold in the U.S. for his attacks. The only way we can truly be safe and prevent further gun violence is to ban civilian ownership of all guns. That means everything. No pistols, no revolvers, no semi-automatic or automatic rifles, no bolt action, no breaking actions or falling blocks, nothing. This is the only thing that we can possibly do to keep our children safe from both mass murder and common street violence. Unfortunately, right now we can't. The political will is there, but the institutions are not. Honestly, this is a good thing. If we passed a law tomorrow banning all firearms, we would have massive non-compliance, you think. What we need to do is establish the regulatory and informational institutions first. This is how we do it. The very first thing we need is national registry. We need to know where the guns are and who has them. Canada has a national firearms registry. We need to copy their model. We need a law demanding all firearms be registered to a national database. We need to know who has them and where they are. We need to make this as easy as possible for gun owners. Well, yeah, that's nice and easy. The federal government provides the money and technical expertise, and the state police carry it out. like a funded mandate. Most firearms already have a serial number on them, and so it would be really a matter of taking the information already on the ATF Form 4473 and putting it in a national database. I think about 6 months should be enough time. Along with this, make private sales illegal. When a firearm is transferred, and by the way, this is universal background checks he's talking, when a firearm is transferred, make it law that the registration must be updated. Again, make it super easy to do, perhaps over the internet. Dealers can log in by their FFLs and update the registration. Additionally, new guns are to be registered by the manufacturer. The object here is to create a clear paper trail from factory to distributor to dealer to owner. We want to encourage as much voluntary compliance as possible. Now we get down to it. The registration period has passed. Now we have criminals without registered guns running around, probably kooky types that lost them on a boat or something. So remember those ATF Form 4473s? Those record every firearm sale going back 20 years, and those have to be surrendered to the ATF on demand. So we get those logbooks and cross-reference the names and addresses with the new National Registry. Sounds just pretty much like what the Nazis did. Since most NRA types own 2 or many more guns, we can get an idea of who properly registered their guns and who didn't. For example, if you have a guy who purchased 6 guns over the course of 10 years, but only registered 2 of them, that raises a red flag. Now, maybe he sold them or they got lost or something, but it gives us a good target for investigation. A nice visit by the ATF or state police to find out if he really does still have all those guns would certainly be warranted. Yep, here we go. Basically warrantless searches of your home. It's certainly not perfect. People may have gotten guns from parents or family and not registered them. Perfect is the enemy of the pretty darn good, as they say. The exercise isn't so much to track down every gun ever sold. The main idea would be to profile and investigate people that might not have registered their guns. As an example, I'm not concerned with the guy who bought that bolt-action Mauser a decade ago and doesn't have anything registered to his name. It's a pretty good possibility that he sold it, gave it away, or got rid of it somehow. And even if he didn't, that guy is not who I'm concerned with. I'm concerned with the other guy who bought half a dozen assault weapons, registered 2 hunting rifles, and belongs to the NRA GOA. He's the guy who warrants a raid. So registration is the first step. Now that we have the vast majority registered, we can do what we will. One good first step would be to close the registry to new registrations. This would, in effect, prevent new guns from being made or imported. This would put the murder machine corporations out of business for good and cut the money supply to the NRA/GOA. As money dries up, the political capital needed for new controls will be greatly reduced. Does this sound all familiar, what you've been saying? There are a few other things I would suggest. I would suggest an immediate national ban on concealed carry. A ban on internet sales of guns and ammunition is a no-brainer. Microstamping would also be a very good thing. Even if the only thing it does is drive up costs, it could still lead to crimes being solved. I'm willing to try every advantage we can get. A national firearms owner identification card might be good. By the way, Illinois already does this. But I'm sure if it's necessary, I'm not sure if it's necessary if we have a national database. We should also insist on comprehensive insurance and mandatory gun safes subject to random spot checks by local and federal law enforcement. We must make guns expensive and unpopular, just like cigarettes. A nationwide anti-gun campaign paid for by a per-gun yearly tax paid by owners, dealers, and manufacturers would work well in this regard. They're going to make you pay for eliminating your own rights. We would also segue into an anti-hunting campaign like those in the UK. By making hunting expensive and unpopular, we can make the transition to a gun-free society much less of a headache for us. I know this seems harsh, but this is the only way we can truly be safe. I don't want my kids being shot by a deranged NRA member. I'm sure you don't either. So let's stop looking for short-term solutions and start looking long-term. Registration is the first step. Tell President Obama and Democrats in Congress to demand mandatory comprehensive gun registration. It's the only way we can ban guns with any effectiveness. This is not a spoof. It's for real. Yeah, the piece dates from 2012 when Obama and company were pushing for so-called universal background checks, but nothing in their agenda has changed. As you may recall, at the time we were telling people that the objective of so-called universal background checks was to capture all firearms transfers, including private sales, in the National Instant Background Check System, or NICS. Those who claim NICS can't be used as a national registry should know that it already has been under the Clinton administration. Only when George W. Bush was elected and Attorney General John Ashcroft reversed the practice did it stop being the case. As I've said many times, they can't ban what they can't find. The goal of universal background checks, aka universal gun registration, is to implement a tool for confiscation when it becomes possible. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker. We're going to take a short break, after which we will return with still more critical information enabling you to better defend your gun rights. My name is Paul Balone. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at HyattGuns.com. Before we delve into the main topic for this segment, namely the terrorist roots of Black Lives Matter, you should know that in this election, the Michael Bloomberg onslaught has begun in North Carolina. That's right, you killed his presidential bid, but he just won't go away. As you probably know, the billionaire and anti-gun zealot has run a variety of AstroTurf, as in phony, so-called grassroots gun ban organizations, with the most recent iteration being Everytown for Gun Safety. All of his gun ban efforts share two common traits: no members to speak of, and millions of dollars in Bloomberg money. I have also noted in earlier shows that Bloomberg promised to invest $60 million to turn several purple states blue, including North Carolina. Well, it's official. According to the Raleigh News and Observer, which gleefully reported that Bloomberg's Everytown sham will spend at least $5 million here in North Carolina. Said the N&O, quote, "The effort from Everytown for Gun Safety, dubbed Gun Sense Majority North Carolina, will involve at least $5 million in ad spending opposing Republicans up and down the ballot, ranging from President Donald Trump to state legislators." You see, in handing control of Virginia to Democrats, Bloomberg learned that his millions are better spent on state legislative races where he gets more bang for the buck. Noting that North Carolina will be a key battleground state, Charlie Kelly, a senior advisor for Everytown for Gun Safety, said, and I quote, "North Carolina could decide the presidency and the balance of the Senate, and it's why we're going to go all in with our most significant investment and effort ever." I say again, ever. Folks, like David against Goliath, our Political Action Committee, the GRNC Political Victory Fund, will be slugging it out with Bloomberg. So please help us do it by donating at grnc.org/ PVF, as in Political Victory Fund. GRNC, like Grassroots North Carolina, grnc.org/PVF. grnc.org/PVF. As I've said before and will continue to say, this election is for all the marbles, and we are counting on you. As I tell people, I have been colluding with the Russians. What I mean by that is that I have apparently become a pundit, I'm a pundit now, on American politics for the Russian news service, Sputnik International. And why have I done that? Because Sputnik is one of the few news services I have found that actually tells the truth about the methods and intentions of the American left. God knows the American media does not. In the most recent example, my comments were used as the centerpiece of a Sputnik International piece entitled Moment of Truth, How BLM Leaders' Words at Once Exposed True Aims and Utter Hypocrisy of the Movement. When asked to comment on the comments by Greater New York Black Lives Matter President Hawk Newsom to Fox News, when he said, and I quote, "If this country doesn't give us what we want, then we will burn down this system and replace it." Burn down. When asked about it by Sputnik, I said, and I quote, that a senior member of the Black Lives Matter organization would admit to the intent to burn down the American political system represents a rare and probably unintentional moment of honesty. BLM was founded by 3 hard-left radicals with ties to an equally radical group calling itself Liberation Road. As such, their intent from the beginning has not been merely to address what they claim is systemic racism, but to tear down America's constitutional republic and replace it with a socialist autocracy. Happily, that comment served as the centerpiece for the article. But more important was what I learned from Sputnik, namely the words of 2 of the founders of BLM spoken in a 2015 interview, which was run in its entirety by justthenews.com, which said, quote, Patrisse Cullors, who founded the group with Alicia Garza and Opal Tometi in 2013, this is Black Lives Matter they founded, was interviewed by Morgan State University professor Jared Ball in 2015 regarding the movement she helped to create. Ball, in that interview, asked Cullors about, quote, critiques of her group, ones that allege, quote, a lack of perhaps ideological direction in Black Lives Matter that would allow it to fizzle out. Responding to that question, Cullors said that the group does have an ideological frame. And she said, myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories, she said, adding that the group's founders ought to, quote, build a movement that could be utilized by many, many black folk. I listened to the video, and that is precisely what Cullors says. This is her own words. The video isn't faked. It isn't a conspiracy theory. It's her own words. All of this dovetails nicely with what I quoted in the last episode of this show from anti-communist expert and writer Trevor Loudon, who noted that Black Lives Matter is actually a front group for a Marxist, actually Maoist group called Liberation Road, in which the 3 principal organizers are trained and dedicated communists. That Liberation Road is itself a splinter group from another Maoist organization calling itself the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, and that Freedom Road was founded in 1985 and can be traced to the terrorist Weather Underground of the 1970s, which bombed the U.S. State Department in 1975, attempted to bomb the Military Induction Center in Oakland, California, and, according to the FBI, in the next year, claimed credit for 25 bombings, including the U.S. Capitol, the Pentagon, the California Attorney General's office, and a New York City police station. Indeed, 3 Weather Underground members inadvertently blew themselves up in Greenwich Village in 1970. In March, Loudon wrote a piece for the Epoch Times, noting that in 2006, Weather Underground terrorist Mark Judd joined up with several old Weather Underground colleagues, including Jeff Jones, Bill Ayers, and Bernadine Dorn. Plus Bill Fletcher Jr. from the Freedom Road Socialist Organization and other radicals to form the Movement for a Democratic Society, or MDS. This organization was a support group for a reformed Students for a Democratic Society, or SDS, which is active to this day on campuses across the United States. SDS, by the way, was yet another terrorist organization affiliated with the Weather Underground. You might note that the Weather Underground folks listed above include Bill Ayers, whom, as you may recall, is best buddies with Barack Obama. Now, I realize all of this gets kind of Byzantine and complicated, so let me lay it out in very clear and simple terms. Here is the first takeaway. The organizers of Black Lives Matter are trained Marxists who act as a front group for terrorists that can be traced back to the Weather Underground terrorist group. As such, the murder of George Floyd, and indeed every other example of their activism, are only intended to serve as poster children, fronts, for fomenting communism in the United States. Now, yeah, I know. The word communism turns people off because it sounds like McCarthyism, but in this case, communism is the only word that fits. Here's the second and equally important takeaway. At present, the only media organization willing to identify BLM organizers as communists and the activists they lead as chumps being duped by their own leaders is a Russian media organization. All of this information is readily available, but only the Epoch Times, which is run by Chinese refugees from communism, and ironically enough, the Russian media organ named Sputnik, are willing to say it. Now, if that doesn't tell you how deep the U.S. is in it right now, I don't know what will. At present, we have not only governmental figures, but large corporations contributing to communists with their roots in terrorism. Happy 4th of July. You're listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom. We're going to take a short break, after which we will return with still more critical information enabling you to better defend your gun rights. My name is Paul Vallone. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at HyattGuns.com. BearingArms.com reports that the Concealed Carry Act, a national concealed handgun reciprocity bill, sponsored yet again by North Carolina Congressman Richard Hudson, is getting new attention, this time from long-haul truckers. He says, quote, "Truck drivers are the backbone of our economy and are facing increased pressures due to COVID-19 and social unrest. I am committed to supporting their safety and vital role in our economy." Hudson noted that truck drivers are often driving alone with valuable merchandise, and they understand the issue at stake better than most. Quote, "Currently, criminals only need to look for an out-of-state license plate to know who to target at a truck stop. The Concealed Carry Act of 2019 would address this threat by ensuring law-abiding citizens, including truck drivers, can carry across state lines as long as they have a valid concealed carry permit or a valid license from a constitutional carry state. We should also note that a professional truck drivers publication recently reported that 79% of truck drivers said they would absolutely not haul vital goods to any city that disbands its police department. Some block party, huh? That's what Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin called it, a block party, the Summer of Love. Well, the results are in from the Summer of Love, and love lost to murder. The Seattle and New York so-called autonomous zones really need to be called anarchist insurgencies. And if you had any doubts about the future, what it would look like without police, the anarchist insurgencies provide a very clear picture. Ignoring for a moment the rapes, assaults, and looting, the first murder victim of the Seattle debacle was teenager Lorenzo Anderson. In fact, 3 people were shot within 48 hours, including 19-year-old Anderson, who died the morning of June 21st. A week or so later, it happened again when a 16-year-old was killed and a 14-year-old was injured when the vehicle they occupied was fired on by unknown assailants. That's unknown assailants because what the shootings all have in common, beyond the fact that they can be laid at the doorstep of Jenny Durkin, is that the occupiers refused to allow police to investigate. According to the Forward Observer, quote, according to reports, the 2 teenagers allegedly stole a vehicle and went for a joyride before coming under fire from CHOP, that's Capitol Hill Occupied, whatever they call it, security forces. The shooters are alleged to have cleaned up evidence, as one Seattle detective described, quote, the crime scene had been disturbed. Interesting. The most ironic part was that when those occupiers who want to abolish police discovered the shootings, they called 911. Well, that anarchist insurgency is over, but its twin is alive and well in New York, where rioters unhappy that the New York City Council had only defunded the NYPD by $1 billion, fully 16% of its budget, occupied a park across from City Hall. That's the thanks that Mayor Bill de Blasio and the left-wing city council get for capitulating to rioters' demands. Of course, leftist Congressperson Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a representative for parts of the Bronx and Queens, agreed with the looters, saying the policing cut amounts to, quote, funny math and does not go far enough in reducing the force's $6 billion annual budget. Meanwhile, New York, like other leftist bastions, is beginning to reap what it has sowed, as there were 250 shooting victims from June 1st to June 28th, according to the NYPD, an increase of nearly 160% over the same period last year. I would say that the lesson in all of this is that the more you give the leftists, the more they want. I would say that would be the lesson if de Blasio and other leftists actually wanted to stop these demonstrations, preferring as they do to allow anarchist mobs to tear down our political system. Systemic racism. That has been the cry of Black Lives Matter and protesters black and white for weeks now since the death of George Floyd. We hear that blacks are being murdered by police and others. We hear that poor little Trayvon Martin was brutally shot by George Zimmerman, never mind that poor little Trayvon, whose age 12 pictures circulated by the media didn't quite reflect the 17-year-old thug who happened to be beating George Zimmerman's head against a concrete sidewalk when Zimmerman had the audacity to shoot him. We've heard hands up, don't shoot in response to the killing of Michael Brown, whose death precipitated the Ferguson riots and more beyond. Hands up, don't shoot reflects the supposed stance of Brown, who was ruthlessly shot down by police, except that hands up, don't shoot is a lie. In truth, Brown, who was pulled over after a convenience store robbery, tried to take the cop's gun, who shot Brown only to save his own life. The witnesses and the physical evidence both corroborate that, although the cop, Darren Wilson, is lucky it didn't happen today, since he likely would be on the receiving end of a murder charge. In breathless media interviews with black rioters, we hear how they are being shot down when they go to pick up the mail or go to the store or walk their dogs, except that, too, is a lie. And then, on a lesser scale, we have blacks who say they've been pulled over in traffic stops at disproportionate rates. Driving while black seems to be the popular description. Well, let's take a look at systemic racism, shall we? In particular, let's start with the 2018 FBI Uniform Crime Statistics, which for now, until the leftists prohibit it, track offenses by, among other things, the race of the offender. Let's take murder. In 2018, blacks committed 53.3% of murders. Or how about robbery, where blacks committed 54.2%? Or rape, 28.6%. Aggravated assault, 33.7%, burglary, 29.4%, larceny, 30%. Overall, blacks in 2018 committed 37.4% of violent crimes in the U.S. This despite the fact that according to the U.S. Census, blacks comprise only about 13.4% of our population. That means that blacks commit violent crimes at a rate roughly 2.8 times that of the population as a whole, twice that of Hispanics, twice that of Native Americans, 2.8 times higher than whites, and a whopping 10 times higher than Asians. I don't know why this may be the case. Greater minds than mine can examine whether it's due to single-parent families or welfare programs or perhaps LBJ's Great Society. But even beyond the simple proportionality of the greatest perpetrators suffering the greatest consequences, we come to what I call copthink. I know a lot of cops. I have for my whole life. And when somebody is forced to deal with lowlifes who commit the most crimes, they tend to think of people as lowlifes. And it stands to reason that the people they see most often committing crimes are going to be the people they tend to treat as criminals. I have absolutely no doubt I will be called a racist for saying this, since it long ago became unacceptable to speak of such things. That began in the late 90s, when it became fashionable to say that prisons or the application of the death penalty was racist because a larger number of prison or death row inmates were black. Never mind that such might be the case not because of institutional racism, but instead because the perpetrators have a higher tendency to be of a particular race. Similarly, may I have the temerity to suggest that perhaps the reason certain races have a higher propensity of being shot by police might be because those races have a higher propensity for doing things that might get them shot. I don't profess to be an expert on the reasons for black involvement in violent crimes or in police shootings, but I can envision one thing very clearly. Imagine that you, perhaps due to the environment of your upbringing or whatever, have had a somewhat problematic relationship with the law. Imagine that so-called progressives have for your entire life been telling you that your misfortunes are the consequences of systemic racism, that the man has been keeping you down. Then imagine you get pulled over by police. Maybe you passed out in your car in a Wendy's drive-thru. Maybe you were in the vicinity of a robbery, whether or not you actually did it. All of that rage over the misfortune you feel that has been dealt to you by racists. All of that comes to a boil, and what do? You resist arrest. Now, in my defensive firearms courses, I was always told that in dealing with police, and I quote, don't fail the attitude test, because the easiest way not to get shot by police is not to resist arrest. There is indeed systemic racism, but it is being perpetrated by so-called progressives who work hard to create the perception of racism and with it attendant rage as part of a political agenda. Those are the racists that blacks should be protesting. My name is Paul Vallone. You've been listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker, where each week we give you the ammunition to better defend your right to keep and bear arms. Please check out our sponsor, Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop, at hyattguns.com. Also, please check out my website at gunspoliticsandfreedom.com, spell out the and, gunspoliticsandfreedom.com, where you can find my writings and earlier editions of the show. See you next week.